Hello, writers. Have you ever bought a writing craft book someone says you just have to read?
Is it still sitting on your shelf? Have you even cracked the spine?
That's totally me.
Don't ask Renee how many craft books she owns.
Why do we keep buying these books we never read?
We all want to improve as writers, but that's hard to do alone.
That's why we started the Words to Write By podcast, to tackle these books together chapter by chapter and learn from their advice.
Or not. Sometimes they're wrong.
Hi, I'm Renee Nelson, former college writing instructor turned full-time writer and podcaster. After many years, I finally have a complete draft of my memoir.
And I'm Kim Smugado, author of the humorous fantasy novel Our Comeback Tour is Slaying Monsters, which is the first book in the Boy Bands and Dragons series, released by Riverfolk Publishing.
And now, on with the podcast.
Hello, and welcome to one of our workshops for Words to Write By.
Welcome.
Today, our guest is Kristen Tate. She is a freelance editor and also has a extensive blog at her website, The Blue Garret. And she has recently published a writing craft book called Novel Study, which approaches advice by analyzing famous and actually fairly recently printed written novels, which working with a craft book right now that's 25 years out of date is really nice to actually say, oh yeah, I've seen that book in the library or in the bookstore. So Kristen, tell us a little bit about your book.
Oh, thanks. Thanks for having me on. I always love talking to y'all. Yeah, the book really stemmed from my kind of frustration as an editor. Before I wrote this book, I wrote, as y'all know, I kind of went the same approach of like, let me find the writing craft book that is going to solve all of my problems. And once I find it, I'm going to be able to tell all of my clients, like, this is how it works. And I went into that very naively and came away realizing, okay, well, like all of these things have gems. Most of these books have gems. Some of them also seem quite wrong to me, and we've talked about that in the past too. But sadly, there is no secret answer. And, novels are like babies. Like everyone is just really different and they all have unique problems. So, I guess that's one way of saying we just need lots of writing craft books because you have to find the right one that will fit your book. But then I decided, okay, now that I've kind of come to this realization, there are similar problems that many authors face, like opening chapters are always a problem, and there are kind of familiar ways to tackle them. But really, like when you get down into the nitty gritty of a novel, most of them don't actually match up with, beat sheets or formulas perfectly. Some of them do, but it's actually quite rare. And so I wanted to just come at it from a different way and start from the novels themselves and see, okay, what structures and techniques can I pull out of these? Like what is actually happening on the page? And it was really exciting. I went through 10 books in different genres, and every single one of them structurally is very, very different, which I think is great news for writers, right? You just, like you can find your own solution, and it will be very exciting for readers when you do.
I know Renee recently has just taken to going to other memoirs and seeing how they did it.
I was doing that before, but now I'm definitely like avoiding craft books mostly. Not yours. I've actually been reading yours. But yeah, I've reached the point of too much advice.
Yeah.
And it's contradicted itself too many times that I'm just like, okay.
And I think that's the way to go. I think writers get anxious about being influenced by other writers. And I understand that fear, but I think you should push it away and like get in there and be reading books in your genre.
Yeah, I've been reading more memoir just to learn from actual books than trying to get advice from craft books, because it's just the advice isn't always matching up with what I'm reading.
Yeah, I think that's the way to go.
Yeah.
So speaking about craft books, we are doing a book that is based on Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey, Hero with a Thousand Faces. And we're taking it stage by stage. And the first couple of stages were fairly straightforward. And, they're very specific what they were in and gave good advice. And then we got to this stage, which was called Tests, Allies, and Enemies. And it was basically the whole second arc or second act of a book. And it wasn't very useful at all. Was it, Renee?
No.
So what do you think goes into the second act of a book, or how do you think of the second act of the book as an editor?
Yeah, I mean, the second act is always where it gets really interesting because to some extent, it's really going to depend on the first act and the third act, of course, right? So, like, one of the books I analyze in novel study is The Searcher by Tana French. And it has a very, very slow start. It's gorgeously written. It's like a really deep character study, lots of wonderful kind of Irish setting details, lots of really interesting secondary characters. But like we're kind of waiting for like, where is the thriller slash mystery plot? So like her second act is really different from The Last Thing He Told Me, which I think we're going to talk about today by Laura Dave, which has a very fast start where like all of a sudden like the inciting incident is right there and it's in the title and like we're off to the races. So it just really depends. For The Last Thing He Told Me, one of the things Dave does is just shift settings, like a really great tactic. If you kind of get to the middle and you're like, I am not sure actually what needs to happen next. I know that that stuff must happen until I get to my climax, but what that stuff is a mystery. So it's really about kind of thinking about what you've already set up and where you're going, and then just getting really creative with ideas. I think this is actually a great place to just brainstorm and be weird and find tangents and think about subplots and maybe think about giving the stage over to some of your secondary characters. Do you have a villain or a new villain who can make an appearance? Or is there a new ally or someone else that you've planted who can kind of blossom here and take the plot in new places?
So, like, there's a lot of advice of like how to start a book or how to finish a book. Often, when clients come to you, they probably have worked through it. They have an idea of how they're going to start. Do they have problems with the middle, or the middle is kind of like an easier thing because it's like the heart of their story, like the main thrust of their story?
Yeah, I think people often do have a hard time in the middle for two reasons. One, they might be struggling to get to the climax that they have set up. Like sometimes they've actually chosen the wrong ending, which happens and can be hard to it can be hard to relinquish. But sometimes there's a more exciting, interesting ending lurking there that they've like written their way towards in the middle and they don't quite see it yet because they're not ready to let go of that original climax that they had envisioned. The other thing that can happen is that writers can get bored in the middle. Like the opening is often very exciting for people, like all of the world building and all of that exciting, like I'm introducing you to these wonderful characters I've invented. And as an author, you're getting to know your characters more. And so like it's like dating, honestly, like those first few days can be like super exciting. And then I don't know, like I think authors can run out of steam in the middle. And so it can just get kind of saggy and they lose tension, right? I think writers can be reluctant to get more action kind of going on the page out of fear of losing control and like introducing more threads than they can easily tie back together in the ending. So lots of times what I see in the middle is authors kind of playing it a little too safe and they just need to add more. They need to be weirder. They just need more.
For our podcast, we've been using John Scalzi's Kaiju Preservation Society as kind of a template to look at these various stages.
Cool.
And when we were getting to the middle section, Renee was saying that it lost the tension, it lost the excitement. What exactly did you say, Renee?
So the issue I was having is that things were happening, but nothing significant. It was more just world building and everyone was always safe. No matter what happened, in the end, it was of no consequence because everything went back to ground zero. Everyone's safe and happy. And I realized that if I'm bringing in, advice from a different craft book we read, I think we interviewed you for this one was Bickham's Scene and Structure.
Yeah.
And he said that at the end of your scene, a disaster needs to happen. And a disaster is a yes but or a no and, right? And I realized that the end of his chapters, of Scalzi's chapters in the middle, and the way it's sagging, it feels like it's because there is no yes, but or no and. There's no consequence to the things that are happening. So I thought that was really fascinating. Yet the book continues. It just kind of sad.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes the solution is to pull a piece out of the climax actually and just stick it in the middle. I actually just had a client do this and it worked really brilliantly. It was originally this like other plot domino kind of fell, and he initially had it, it was this part that set up this big self-realization, and it happened after kind of like the initial battle with the enemy. And then he had this self-realization, and that can be a great choice and often works really well. But he was kind of having that same, I don't know, just like what is going on in the middle. And he just took that piece out and stuck it kind of in the middle of Act Two. And it worked beautifully there, like instant kind of charge, right, of like emotion and intensity. And then the reader also kind of gets to reevaluate everything that's come before and get kind of excited for like the new potential that can come after. So that's a technique that can really work, is like, is there some piece of the fireworks you have set up for the climax that can be positioned earlier?
Interesting. That maybe Kim will tell me to stop. I'll stop if you want, Kim. I don't know if anybody's been watching this show called Arcane.
Yes.
Okay, so me and my husband are in love with it, and reading all these books and learning all this advice. I'm watching this story and there are no mistakes. It just comes out, I don't want to say perfect, but I'm not seeing any problems structurally. And it's amazing. We re-watched the first season in preparation for the second. And one thing is, given that you said that they pulled something from the end and put it in the middle, I find it's interesting that the first season has 2 story arcs. It has a complete story arc. It actually could have just been a 4-episode season, a complete story arc, and then it restarts and creates a whole nother one with the characters as they've aged now.
Yeah.
I feel like that's a similar trick, right? You're going in and you're bringing in something at the end and to like increase the stakes. And Act Two, right? You have to do all the work of telling a story to get to that kind of middle ending, right?
Yeah.
Did that person start kind of over again after that point?
I mean, they didn't really start over. It's just like all of the stakes changed. And I can actually keep going with your Arcane example because I have watched this because my kids are huge fans. I barely made it through it because I found it so emotionally wrenching.
Oh,
but I think what happens in that story, it's a backstory, right? That's what we get. So we get the front story, we get kind of up to speed with that. Then they pause that and we go into this like, I found really brutal backstory to help us understand where we are. And then we restart the front story. And that is a great tactic too. And like, if you look at novel study, that's kind of a recurring theme, is like all of the different kinds of ways you can pull in backstory. The last thing he told me is really interesting because Laura Dave, the he in the title is the husband of the protagonist, Hannah. And we never, I won't give away spoilers, we don't really see him on the pages of the novel except in the backstory. And what Dave has done is chopped up the backstory, and he starts furthest back in time and then takes us to some scenes that are quite recent, just before the husband's disappearance. So that's just kind of another way of weaving in those clues. And backstory can be a great solution for a saggy middle. Often writers want to include it too soon. And what we really want to see is your protagonist grappling with whatever issue is important to them right then. They need to deal with the backstory stuff, but not right away. And especially beginning writers want to give it to us too soon. Like the middle, going into the excursion right then, is a great way to do it. Handmaid's Tale does the same thing, actually. Like if you look at the structure of that, a lot of the key backstory drama is located in the middle of that novel.
We were actually talking about that on the last episode that we just recorded. We're talking about Handmaid's Tale and how it doesn't seem to start at the beginning, but it does, because it starts kind of in the middle of action, but then it goes backwards.
Yep.
And then we get the backstory and a whole almost complete beginning, middle, and end. And then it resets itself into the present day.
Absolutely. And where it gets really exciting is when, like, as we're going through that backstory, if the front story can drop in new revelations for the protagonist and have them realize, oh, okay, I thought I knew this backstory, but here's a new piece of information, or here's a new character showing up to tell me something I didn't know. And that's something that Dave does as well. And it's super exciting.
I learned a new word reading your novel study, dramatic irony, with basically meaning that we, the reader, know something that the main character doesn't know. And it's kind of ironic. We're watching them do things, maybe make sense to them, but we know that it's wrong because there's other elements. And in the last thing you told me, it's all from the main protagonist's point of view. We don't know anything else other than what she knows, except through some of the backstory, some very key details are dropped. So people reading carefully suddenly have this aha. And when they're reading her adventures at that point, they know something more. So it brings more tension to it.
Exactly. And tension is exactly the right word. Like, that's what dramatic irony gets you right away, because as readers, that's when you want to like shake the character and scream at them. It's actually fantastic. Like, you're not paying attention to this. And we know as readers, like, if we see this little episode that seems like nothing dropped in there, we see so little of the backstory in that Laura Dave novel that we know that this scene has got to be significant. And we can actually start to see, oh, this lines up with this. And she knows this. She has just forgotten it. And when she puts this puzzle piece together, it's going to be really exciting. And Dave sets it up so that we actually get there before the protagonist does, which is just so much fun for the reader.
For a thriller, is it okay for the readers to get there before the protagonist gets there? Because usually it's like that's part of a thriller, is that it all comes together. It's like, oh my God.
I think if you still have some surprises left in reserve.
And then the other thing you were saying about that book was that she had 3 different settings for the arcs, but she also had 3 different questions the reader had for what was going to happen. Can you talk a little bit about that without giving spoilers?
Yeah, I thought this was really clever. And it ties to that location shift I was saying. So kind of as the book opens, the protagonist, Hannah, her husband has disappeared. And at first we think that it's something to do with this tech company that he's working for. And then some like weird things about the husband's background start to come to life. And she starts asking some questions. And that's when she and her stepdaughter travel from the Bay Area to Austin, Texas. So that's one of the things that happens in that act 2. Okay, we're in a new setting that gives immediate energy. And now the plot about what's happening with this company. The company has been raided, and that's kind of all she knows. And her husband's disappeared, and the FBI is kind of investigating this company. But in Act 2, those questions kind of disappear. Like, they become really secondary because all of a sudden she's after kind of more information. There's a mystery about who her husband really is. And that's the question that takes over Act 2. And I think that is just such a smart solution for how to deal with that kind of saggy middle, because all of a sudden, all of the questions we thought we were pursuing become secondary. We know they're going to be related. We finally see all those pieces come together in Act 3. But in Act 2, it's kind of like, oh, there's a whole nother mystery plot that we weren't expecting. So that's another technique you can use, is just think about, is there another way to come at your plot? Or can you like break up these questions, or even break them up into 2 different characters? Another book I look at in novel study is The Secret Hours by Mick Herron. And he kind of does this where he takes the plot and kind of splits it into 2 different protagonists. So we kind of follow the story into the resolution in 2 different ways that give us a really different sense of what that story means. So like, that's another technique to consider, is like, do you have another character who maybe could be a whole nother point of view character and maybe dominates Act 2, or just gets a bigger voice or a bigger role in Act 2?
You work with clients that are both plotters and more discovery writers. The thing I found really interesting was your comment about the writer, Dave. She isn't a plotter, and the comment that she makes multiple drafts of her book to figure out what's going on, which from a thriller perspective, you think a thriller is very tightly plotted right from the beginning. So I was thinking for people that are plotters and like to plot out their whole book, what kind of advice would you have for them to you, or for you have clients like that? What kind of advice do you have for them in their middles? And then I'll do it with pantsers as well. But
Yeah, that's such a great question. I think I think the plotters have to loosen up a little bit in the middle. And I've said this a couple of times, like get weird and creative, like let loose some brainstorming, maybe even have like a lighter plan in the middle. It's fine to have like the beginning and the end locked down, and then just give yourself room to maybe not write the scenes you had planned in the middle and just go off on a tangent and see what happens. Because like that's kind of where the excitement can be. I mean, this is kind of the whole secret of brainstorming, is that when we're thinking about a solution to any problem, the most obvious ones are the ones that we come to first. So if you're too quick to kind of nail down, here are going to be all of the steps to my plot, and I can see this beautiful, tidy arc that gets me straight there. I don't know, like your reader also might be able to spot that entire arc by chapter 3 and just be like, I don't know, I feel like I've read this story before. Whereas if you can kind of force yourself to say, all right, I know the beginning, I know the ending. Let me spend a few hours or even like the course of a week forcing myself to come up with like, I don't know, 20, 30 different ways that I could get from point A to point B. I think that can be really interesting. And another great question to ask yourself is, what if this was opposite? Because like if you have this all plotted out, picking each scene in the middle and kind of asking that question to it can unlock some really exciting stuff and maybe take you on a surprise tangent.
so like if you have your characters getting into a car and making a getaway, then what would happen if they did get a getaway and they got caught at this point? That kind of thing.
Exactly.
And that's also good. It forces you to come with an unobvious solution.
Yep. And then you have to think through, well, how would I get them out of this? And then all of a sudden, like you might be off on this whole other super exciting tangent that you never saw coming.
And then likewise for people that are pants or discovery writers that are making up as they go along, what kind of suggestions do you have when they get to the middle and it starts to sag?
Yeah, I think first of all, just write your way through, right? Because it's so much easier to revise if you can get that ending kind of nailed down. I was interested to see that Dave said that in an interview that's actually at the end of the last thing he told me. I think she said she wrote 18 drafts of this novel. And this is the pain and peril of being a discovery writer, is that sometimes you do need to do that. My guess is too that the backstory is part of it. The reason that her backstory is so structured and so deliberate and such short little well-planned snippets is almost certainly because she wrote it a few different times and had it all there to then select from. So I think if you're a discovery writer, just understand your drafts as like all of the cloth that you're going to have. And then your job is, after you've generated all of this cloth, so much beautiful, beautiful cloth, you just go back to having note cards or a spreadsheet and kind of walk through what you have, and then think about what you still have on that cloth that might be more interesting than what is laid out in that structure, if that makes sense. If you're a discovery writer, your job is kind of generate more material than you need, and then go back and structure it. And that's the part where you have to kind of go back and forth and try it out. And that's the part where you get weird, is moving those pieces around and kind of going back and looking at your cloth and saying, oh my gosh, but there's this piece that turned out so beautifully. And if you can't bear to let it go, then you have to figure out a way to make it work.
That's the hard part there.
It is truly.
Okay, well, this has been a great conversation. I'm curious for the novel study book, was there did you have a favorite book that you went through for that?
Oh, that's a good question. One that delighted me all the way through is Dial A for Aunties. It's so fun. It has so many plot strands. This is actually a really great one, I think, for people to study if they are kind of trapped in a boring middle. The author is Jessie Q. Sutanto, and her solution is just to have a bunch of really wild plot strands. She has, I think there's 4 is what I kind of ended up counting in there. And anytime one gets boring, she just shifts to another one and just keeps it going. And it's really impressive and really fun. Every time I dipped into it, just made me feel better about the world. And we need that.
We need that. Yeah.
Yeah, we definitely do.
Before we go, where can people find your book?
Oh, thank you. Well, it is everywhere. I publish wide, but you can get all the details from my website, thebluegarret.com.
Awesome.
This was a great conversation. And actually, that was some good advice as we work through our middles of our books.
Yay.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I do own too many craft books, and a lot of them do avoid talking about Act 2, which is the majority of the book.
Yeah.
But partly it's because they can't give direct advice because it can't be applied to every single book.
Yeah.
Now, they don't say that, but it's nebulous. It's hard. It depends. What's the plot?
Yeah.
What are you trying to achieve? Where's the ending going? So it's really just nebulous. Like, you have to kind of make it up as you go. And there are good practices, but you're not even sure which ones to apply until you've got some kind of draft.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you guide people through this process, right? That's what you do through the Blue Garret.
Yeah, that's part of it. And some people do just fine, but I do find if people get lost in their plot, the middle is often where it happens. Or sometimes that's where people get stuck and they can't even get to the finish line because they just run out of steam and they're not quite sure how to get there.
Right.
I'm also realizing that the middle is where people put the book down and don't pick it up again.
Yeah, you can lose readers.
Usually they'll give you the beginning because they want to see what the setup is. And if you can get them to the end, they'll finish it up because they only have, 50, 100 pages to find out what happens. But like the middle, that's where you put the book down if you're not interested.
Totally. Totally.
See, my theory is that when I get a book and the first 3 or 4 chapters are really good and suddenly it just starts to fall apart, those first 3 or 4 chapters are what they sent to the agent. It's so polished. They revised those first 3 chapters so much, did all the agent queries. The agents read it like, oh yeah, this is going to be a great story. They didn't have the rest.
Yeah.
That's my theory. Not sure if that's true.
I think it's a great theory. I mean, I guess like you're just trying to clear that first bar of like getting people to buy the book or check it out from the library. Like, I don't know. Do you need to? I mean, if you want to land on a bestseller list or want people to read your next book, you need to get them to finish it. But, I think sometimes people kind of run out of steam and just try to clear that first bar.
Right.
Well, thank you so much. Thanks for talking to us.
Oh, it was fun. I enjoy your podcast so much. And I love how kind of honest and witty you are. And Renee, your show notes continue to be a delight. And
You read them?
I do read them.
Somebody reads them.
I don't read them for every episode, but there's always like so much great stuff buried in there. Y'all should talk about them more because they're just like gems. Like, you're so funny in there. And I always love coming across something where you're just like, you could not resist another dig at this thing you really hated. I love it.
That's my jam. That's where I have fun. Kim can't say no as much in the show notes.
No, I let her do whatever she wants in the show notes, pretty much. I'm just so glad not to have to write them.
Oh.
Now, we've specialized over time to who does what part of the podcast. And
No, super
part of the reason we're
smart.
still going at it. So thanks so much. Great talking to you.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's always fun. I'm always happy to come on and talk to you guys.
Well, we'll come again.
Bye. Have a good Sunday.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Words to Write By is produced by Renee Nelson and Kim Smiga Adam. Our theme music is Roll Back the Carpet by Cool Cat Music. Have a great day.
Can everyone hear me okay? Because I'm not hearing myself through my headphones. So I guess I'm hearing you guys. Okay, cool.